Hello, this is Mr. Hop, and let's go through a real quick review of trig functions before we get into projectile motion. So the first thing we need to do is remember the parts of the right triangle. We have the 90-degree portion right here, and then we have the angle of interest between these two sides. This is the Greek letter theta, and then this is the opposite side. So we have three sides of the triangle that we have named. We have the hypotenuse, which is always the longest, the opposite side, which is opposite of the angle of interest, or theta, and the adjacent, which is the side that's touching the angle but not the hypotenuse. Remember the acronym SOHCAHTOA, and I literally write this down every time I try to solve one of these so I don't make a silly mistake. So keep that in mind. Write them down, save yourself some trouble. So let's think about the acronym SO. So that means the sine of the angle is equal to the opposite divided by the hypotenuse. Let's think about the acronym CA, like the crow. Cosine theta. So cosine of the angle is equal to the ratio of adjacent divided by hypotenuse. And last but not least is TOA. And that is the tangent of the angle is equal to the opposite divided by the adjacent. So you need to know the names of the parts of the triangle, and then it's real easy to solve these. As far as sine, cosine, and tangent, it's just a button on the calculator. Don't stress, we're just going to trust that the trig works. But what if you need to solve for the angle? Let's say we have this right triangle that has a hypotenuse of 16 and an opposite side of 9. How would we find the angle? This is where we need to use the inverse function of sine, cosine, or tangent. In this case, we know the opposite and the hypotenuse. We just need to move sine to the other side by using the inverse function. So the angle is equal to sine -1, or the inverse sine, times the opposite divided by the hypotenuse. The only time you use the inverse is when you are looking for the angle. It is important that you make sure your calculator is in degrees, or you will get really bizarre answers. To get to the inverse, you need to use either the second button or the inverse button on your calculator to get to the inverse sine functions, or cosine function, or tangent function. So let's finish solving this problem. So the inverse sine times the opposite over the hypotenuse is the inverse sine times 9 divided by 16, and when you plug that in your handy dandy calculator, you get an angle of 34.22 degrees. That's the end.